Live and direct, live and I take no jive.
Legalize it.
I mean, how much can a koala bear? Koala bear, koala bear. Koala bear. Barry pulls a joint out of his pocket. Bill says, "Great, Barry, a reefer."
Hi, welcome back to the Koala podcast. I've got David Shoebridge, Senator for the Greens in Australia, on the line today for a quick part two of our conversation that we had prior to Christmas about the Australian medical cannabis sector and industry. In the first part, we just spoke about all the issues. And in the second part, we're just doing a quick catch up because he's pretty busy about what he's going to be saying about cannabis coming up to the, as yet, I think, undeclared date for the federal election in Australia.
Yes, we frustratingly don't have fixed terms for federal elections. So it's in the, to some extent, it's in the gift of the Australian Prime Minister. We know it has to be before the 17th of May.
When's the last point he can actually declare?
The last point is, like, if he wanted to go right to the wire, he could push this pretty much to the end of March before he makes the announcement. But if he does that, then we know what the date will be. It'll be the 17th of May.
Yeah.
Because if he wants to have that's the last possible date for a Senate election, and look, the last person who decided to have a House of Reps election on one day and a Senate election on the other months later, they found the Australian public weren't super appreciative of having two elections within 6 months. The last possible date for the election is 17 May.
The Cannabis Party are putting up a lot of candidates and some quite good ones for the Senate. We've just had the Australian Medical Cannabis big shindig up in Brisbane. There's a report today in the AFR about Germans being very keen on Australian medical cannabis. It does seem to be a discussion. What are the Greens going to be going to the election saying about cannabis? Obviously, you haven't released your manifesto, so I know you can't.
It is absolutely Greens policy to push for legalised recreational cannabis at a state and at a federal level. So, I mean, that is part of the policy package that we'll be taking to this federal election. And the good news is we've done a lot of work in the last parliamentary term to make that a reality. You know, I personally welcome other political players legalising cannabis in any election contest. We think it's useful to have more rather than less people talking about legalising cannabis. I would suppose one of the strengths the Greens have is we bring not just that sort of narrowish cohort of people who legalising cannabis is driving their politics to the table. We bring with it, a broad national support base, which, yes, is people who want to legalise cannabis. Yes, it's people who want to hold powerful industries like the pharmaceutical industry to account. We bring environmentalists to the table. We bring social justice people to the table. We particularly connect with younger generations, and ensuring that we have that broad cross-section of Australian society behind the push to finally legalise recreational cannabis. We think that's the surest way of getting there. So, we're proud of the decades of campaigning we've done to legalise recreational cannabis. We're proud of the successes that we've had in the campaigning so far to legalise medicinal cannabis, and it will absolutely be, a key part of our electoral offering.
And if any of these other independents or the Cannabis Party get in, do you see yourself working together as a sort of coalition of the willing to talk to which of the two major parties, because it's fairly on the line, because they'll need pushing across the line, whichever side of politics it is. So do you see that as if not a policy in terms of the way the Greens are thinking, as a sensible move to really group these people and make that group fairly obvious in the early days of the parliament, because as you know, as we all know, doesn't mean it won't take another 24 months to actually get a piece of legislation through.
Well, I mean, my primary focus in the next little bit is getting as many Greens elected as we possibly can in the Senate and the lower house, because I know it's a party. I'm a part of a party and a national movement that has for decades now absolutely done the hard yards and campaigning to get rid of the failed legal war on cannabis. So I think for me that's my task at the moment, to get as many of those solid comrades into the federal parliament, who I know will be absolutely there with me every day when I push the two major parties who I think have a far looser grip on power now than they ever have, to push towards legalizing cannabis. But I'm on the record as saying I'll work with whoever is willing to work with us to get this across the line. You know, whether they're purple, red, pink, green, I'll work with them to get this across the line. I'm in this for the policy outcomes, not for any kind of narrow political win. You know, I would love at the end of 2025 to be able to, after a particularly fruitful, hopefully, but no doubt stressful week in the Senate, to trot down, instead of going to a pub, to go down to a legalized cannabis cafe / dispensary, and as an adult, have that as an option for me to wind down after an intense week, rather than just having a bar or a pub as an option.
The standard beer in the pub, the pub photo shoot.
And all of the evidence says that if, to the extent that you would be getting people to substitute alcohol for well-regulated recreational cannabis, you're having a public health win. And I personally think adults should be adults and be able to make these decisions in Australia. And we'll work with whoever we need to get there. I mean, my personal hope is we have a minority Labor government that is absolutely dependent on a progressive crossbench of Greens and others in order to form government. And in that space, you rest assured I will be a very powerful and strong advocate for ensuring that legalising cannabis, getting rid of this incredibly wasteful, destructive law and order approach to cannabis, is one of the priorities we bring to the table.
Now, a few weeks back, you were on the floor talking about the medical cannabis industry and the kind of creating a cannabis industry per se that could benefit the Australian economy. To what was the figure that you were presenting, and do you want to just give me a little bit more the background on that and your thinking on that, considering we've got an industry already, so to speak?
Yeah. Well, we have some fresh costings that have come out of the Parliamentary Budget Office about what the public revenue will be from legalising cannabis. And I'm sorry, Sean, but I'm not going to release them here. They're going to be released as part of a sort of campaign announcement on cannabis. And those numbers have been refined after having some further analysis by the Parliamentary Budget Office, which is an independent statutory authority attached to the Parliament. They've been refined, looking in more detail at the Canadian experience. But I can tell you now there are billions and billions and billions of dollars of public revenue available from a well-regulated recreational cannabis market. So that'll be
part of that market in the Greens manifesto. And again, I know you can't. There's certain things you can't say because you've got to release a manifesto. Does investment play a part in that conversation? Because at the moment the investment's all private and it's not really encouraged by government. I mean, behind the scenes, maybe some of it is, but it's not a public discussion. Is that part of? Can I ask you whether that's part of what you're talking about?
Well, I mean, the firm numbers we have are on the public revenue side, and so we haven't had costed the kind of much more diffuse, but I think perhaps in many ways even more important, economic benefits that we would get from a well-regulated recreational market. I mean, one of the things that I'm excited about in the space is the jobs we'd get, particularly in regional parts of my home state of New South Wales, but regional parts across the country. I look forward to a world where, if you go to Nimbin, there is, or you go to the north coast of New South Wales, there is a flourishing, legal, safe, regulated recreational cannabis industry that is like leaning into some of the natural assets there. I don't know, best organic Nimbin blue for sale, and people having.
Well, I mean, that's exactly what the AFR article said this morning. Is the German medical cannabis buyers really like the quality of the Australian cannabis, they call it marijuana, that they're buying, and it's indoor grown, but it is from that part of the world.
Yeah.
I suppose the other
Well, I
question,
mean, I've been and seen some of the facilities growing medicinal cannabis in Australia, and we are good at this, right? I've been down to, particularly a facility down in Tasmania, and I saw the 100 plus jobs, that secure, well-paid jobs that was delivering to the greater Hobart economy down there in Tasmania. I saw the pride that people took in producing an incredibly well-considered product that was seriously helping people's lives. And I saw the plans to extend the facility because of the good name that they had, both domestically and internationally in the medicinal market. Now, imagine we start doing that at scale in the recreational market as well. We're not talking hundreds of jobs, we're talking tens of thousands of jobs.
well, there's 600,000 in the US, moving towards a million already.
Just think about also transitioning the people who are currently in the illegal market, which is often exploitative. To say it's insecure would be underestimating the fact. If you're in an illegal market controlled by criminal gangs, imagine just the positive change by transitioning the thousands of people who are currently in a dangerous, insecure, illegal market where their boss is maybe a bikie gang, to actually having instead secure, legal jobs that pay superannuation, let you go to the bank and get a mortgage, don't put you at risk of, adverse action from the police, and produce a product that you can be confident in, that is going to be safely and well regulated. Just thousands of people getting out of an illegal, crappily regulated, dangerous industry, which is what it is at the moment, into a legal, well-regulated, positive industry that they can tell their friends about. I mean, just that change would be meaningful across the country.
I know you're busy. I've got two very quick questions. One we touched on in the last conversation, which was the push and pull and tug between regulation and law enforcement. And I saw something very interesting over the weekend. The Yaws and Owls Festival had the first ever pill testing in New South Wales, which allowed people to legally have their drugs tested. But at the same time, the police, although the New South Wales Labor government had allowed that to happen, the police still demanded that they went on site and let the walk around with dogs, ensuring that they would catch people with pills. How will the Greens, with their partners, be able to manage this on a massive national scale when we're talking about proper regulation of cannabis? Because that's a microcosm of how law enforcement is thinking, obviously.
The discussion amongst law enforcement communities is actually much more complex than what you see being presented in, say, the Daily Telegraph or,
that's understood entirely. That's
one of the most fascinating submissions we had to our national inquiry, Senate inquiry into legalising cannabis, actually came from the New South Wales Police Association, the police union in New South Wales. And they kind of just openly admitted that, policing of cannabis has failed, that it's regularly available. The price is not going up because they can't possibly police their way out of, cannabis supply. And they basically said, well, look, we've got this problem with drug driving. We should sort that out. The drug driving, we should have a rational response to drug driving and the levels of influence and impairment when it comes to cannabis, and they recognised that was a problem. But they said, let's sit down and try and sort some of those solutions out. And maybe it's time. And, it's not me. This is the New South Wales Police Association saying, well, Jesus, maybe it's time to, give legalising cannabis a go and see if it works. Because
so in senior management, in policing circles around the country, there is a desire to generate change as long as it doesn't get out of control. Is that the sense that you're getting?
What I'd say I come back to what I said. It's actually a much more complex debate, even in policing circles, than it is. I mean, there are a bunch of senior police who absolutely love having the power to police cannabis, because that justifies a bunch of additional police resources. It justifies a bunch of additional search powers. It's often that the suspicion of possession of cannabis is often the basis which police use to stop and search young First Nations men in this country or people of colour. Like, there's also an element of policing that likes having these powers and likes having this control and likes having the resources they're given. I mean, but none of that is for a public good. None of that, I think, does the police credit. But there are also, what I'm trying to say to you, there are people inside the policing space who realise that it's a damaging, abusive relationship that it sets up between ordinary Australians and the police, and they realise that it's a dead end.
It's just it's discussions with the help of Canberra and the state houses, giving them the backup that they need in order to be able to generate from a black market to a regulated market.
People say to me, well, David, why did you go to all this bother of drafting national legislation, bringing it to the Senate, having an inquiry about it, having a committee on it, when you knew that probably Labor were going to be a bunch of deadheads and the coalition were always the coalition, where they always want to jail their way out of a problem? Why did you do that? And the reason you do that is to open the window of discussion, to create the space for a national debate, so that those people, whether it's inside police or it's inside advocacy groups or it's just inside the community, the millions of Australians who want this done, they have a space where they can push for the change that we need. And I think this federal election is the one of the nearest and clearest opportunities we have to finally get a national legalised recreational market. We've proven it can be done, because the Greens bill that I presented proves it can be done. We've proven that there's billions of dollars of revenue in it. We've proven that it directs police resources where they should be directed at, which is serious violent crime, rather than policing whether people have a joint in their pocket. And I'm actually excited about what we can do in the next 12 months.
Okay, and I just have one more question before we go. And this is the issue of industrial hemp, which is, again, a huge opportunity for Australia. Again, I presume you're going to be talking about this in your manifesto, and there's not much you can share at the moment. But do you see this as a separate issue or tied in as one issue? Are you going to be having two conversations, or is it part of the one conversation?
Well, I mean, to some extent they're tied in, because it's the same stupid,
it's the same plant.
Campaign. It's a plant, right?
Yeah.
There's hemp, marijuana.
It's the same very clever plant, actually.
Yeah, apparently it grows like a weed. It's got really strong fibers, doesn't require a huge amount of pesticides, and can solve a bunch of problems. I mean, that's really problematic, isn't it, for the pharmaceutical industry, for some of the existing suppliers in the building trade, and even for parts of the native logging industry. So it's a bloody inconvenient plant, isn't it? But to be quite frank, the push we have to sort of get rid of the last stupid restrictions on industrial hemp will not be part of our first announcement on recreational cannabis. We'll be focusing on the recreational market first of all. But my colleague Peter Wilson, who's a Green senator in Tasmania and has the agriculture and primary producer portfolio responsibilities in the party, I can tell you now he is a 100% advocate for industrial hemp. We know that it can be an incredibly important part of the building supply chain. We know that it can replace a bunch of natural fibers, not least pulped fibers from the native logging industry, which I think would be an amazing environmental and social win if we could replace logging native forests with hemp fiber instead for paper and cardboard and the like. It's part of our policy platform, but it won't be announced in the same moment as our recreational cannabis push.
Senator David Shoebridge, thank you very much for giving us a little bit of your time, because I know you're busy, on the Karma Koala podcast. The koalas will be very, very happy, especially on the native logging front. We're praying for it like every day.
The koalas are on board, and when we get you out of Jakarta at some point, Sean, sometime at the end of next year, we'll go to a beautiful cannabis cafe